Welcome to the Demon Village.
You are young Arthur, the brave knight, and you've got no choice but to enter this dark, dank place to do what is right and save your beloved princess Prin Prin, who, might I add, has also been kidnapped by Satan. Don't feel so bad now, do you, Peachy? Ah, poor old Mario, Gucci Goo, is that dancing turtle scaring you? Well, how about some zombies, ogres, demons, cyclops and dragons? Of course, I am talking about the old school amazing classic game called Ghosts and Goblins. Welcome to Slope's Game Room. So here it is, Ghosts and Goblins by Capcom, released in Japan in 1985 to the arcades, and eventually a crazy amount of other systems too. To say that this series has not only been enjoyed by gamers, but also been a huge influence to developers, spawned crazy amounts of sequels and spin-offs, and most importantly for everyone watching, is a game series that I hold very dear to my heart. But as usual on Slope's Game Room, we are getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, so it's best to start at the beginning. Here we have Takeru Fujiwara, a young lad who's attending Osaka's Designers College. He recalls that one day a recruiter for a small company called Konami came onto the college campus, discussing an opening for a product planner. And the pay was really good. So Takuro decided to go along and sit the entrance exam. Why the hell not, right? I mean, the headquarters were actually really close to his home. The only problem is Takuro didn't really know what the company was. He had no real interest in computer games, and he goes on record saying that he didn't even enjoy classics such as Space Invaders at the time. Takuro went to the company and at first worked on acrylic boards for coin-operated games. However, it wasn't long until he was put to work on his first game, Puyan. The design was already in place. In fact, it was based on the Three Little Pigs. But Takuro still managed to put a nice unique twist and ended up developing a unique styled game, taking influences from popular shmups and platformers of the time. He then went on to making the arcade game Rock and Rope, a game that probably is a tad too hard in all honesty. But what it did do, and more importantly for this episode, was turn Takuro into a crazed video game creator. Yep, his obsession on game design was well underway, and only 1 year after joining the company in 1983, Takuro moved away from Konami and joined another fairly small company that was really only just dipping its toes in the video game market. And that company was called Capsule Computers, who eventually renamed themselves to simply Capcom. It was here that he worked on the game Vulgus, and eventually he actually ended up working on 2 games at the same time. Commando and Ghosts and Goblins, which, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the first game in a long list of games in this, the complete history of Ghosts and Goblins. We all know this game, the one that started it all. What you're looking at might be slightly better than what you remember on the NES, because this is the arcade version. Although what you're seeing here is most likely extremely familiar to gamers all over the world. The constant stream of baddies that just don't give up, that nostalgia-inducing running animation, and of course, this first level. The reason why it's so iconic is due to the game's difficulty. Most gamers never even got past this first level. Don't let that put you off though, even with the game's extreme difficulty, it has somehow managed, even after all these years, to constantly tempt me to just try one more time. The only other way I can explain this is when you look at games like these, everyone knows how crazy hard they are, yet you really want to keep trying again and again to beat the game. Well, I think it's pretty much the same here. As already said, you're Arthur. You gotta save Princess Prin Prin by running from left to right, and that's really it. However, this game was released back in the days of a lot of cutesy 2D platformers. In fact, it actually only came out 9 days after the legendary Super Mario Bros. In Japan. And well, thankfully, the game plays brilliantly. even by today's standards. Sure, you got to get used to the 2 hits and you're dead way of playing, and how you can't change your jump mid-air like you can on other platformers. However, all of this helps build the charm of what is a super iconic game. Get hit once trying to save your lady friend, and you're in your underwear fighting off evil beings. You got different weapons at your disposal that you can pick up throughout the game, most iconically Sir Arthur's lance. You get these by opening treasure chests that appear throughout the game. Like I said, the game is hard as balls, and it gets even harder if you ever somehow manage to make it to the end of the world, to then suddenly be told you got to do the whole thing again in a higher difficulty before you can save Princess Prin Prin. The game was ported to, everything, and as you would expect, ended up getting some really bloody good ports, like the well-loved NES version, which most people will remember. And honestly, some pretty decent looking home computer versions, including my beloved Amstrad. However, they mostly play like crap. Now let's all laugh at the horrific Commodore 64 box art. After the game's massive success, it wasn't long before good old Capcom cashed in on this new franchise of theirs and released the follow-up, Ghouls and Ghosts. This is the game I had the most of a connection with as a youngster for the Mega Drive, with the crazy alluring artwork on the front cover. But never fear, the game was available yet again on most things. 3 years after saving Princess Prin Prin, Arthur is away from the castle when it gets taken over by gargoyles. Prin Prin gets kidnapped again and Sir Arthur returns to save his princess. I must have put in a crazy amount of time in this game back in the day as a kid. I never got past this first level. It's even harder than the original game. However, weirdly, when you get past this, the rest of the game is actually slightly easier. The game is yet again great fun and is fully worth your time, but obviously it's still damn hard. You can now shoot up and down rather than just left and right, and you can get gold armour, which sadly doesn't give you any extra life as you would expect, but instead it actually turns your weapons more powerful. One thing that has stuck out for me is the hilarious transformations of the magician character. Remember when you was turning into a baby or an old man in the old game? Well, he's back. He still turns you into an old man if you have no armour, but brilliantly, if you're wearing armour, you turn into a duck. Amazing. Just like the last game, you get to the end and realise you have to do the game again before saving Princess Prin Prin. Thankfully this game, like I said, is slightly easier, so it's really not as bad as you'd expect. Just got to keep those wits about you though as you fight through this gorgeous looking game with absolutely amazing sprite work. Just look at this, the final boss. Everything in the game is a slight improvement on an already excellent first entry in the series, which, thankfully, led its way to the very best game in the series. Super Ghouls and Ghosts for the Super Nintendo. Yet again, a crazy hard game that in all fairness is probably the easiest of the three, and after playing those two, you really should be a king of hardcore platforming by this point. This is the first game in the series to not start its life in the arcades, and I think it's because of this that the game feels a lot more platformy than the previous two entries. The most noticeable difference is the double jump, which thankfully means you can change direction on the second jump. You can also upgrade your armour twice in this version, which sadly yet again does not give you any extra life, which does however, just like the last game, boost up those weapons. The magician is back as well. This time he changes you to an infant if you've got no armour, a seal if you've got standard armour, a bee if you've got green armour, or a young woman if you've got gold armour. Yet again, the game requires you to complete the game twice, a tradition that I'm not really the biggest fan of. But, like I said, the game is the easiest of all three, so again, it's not too bad. Eventually, you fight the final boss, who is actually one of the easiest in the whole game, and you save your beloved Princess Prin Prin for the third time. Without a doubt, the game is easily the cherry on top of the whole franchise, and a must-have game for all you SNES collectors out there. And I probably agree, although it's not my personal favourite of the whole series. We'll get to that one shortly. Super Ghouls and Ghosts is brilliant fun. Sure, it's likely that 99% of the people that have played it, just like the previous entries in this original trilogy, will have never got past level 1. But somehow, it doesn't make the game bad. Instead, the graphics, the style, the difficulty, and the amazing music actually leaves you with a happy feeling inside, no matter how frustrated you may get. Or at least that's what I think. 1 year later, in 1999, Japan got the only exclusive game for the series, Makimura for Wonder Swan. However, this was not a simple port of that original game. It is in fact its own game entirely, which although plays quite brilliantly considering the hardware, suffers from the same problem that the Super Ghouls and Ghosts port for the Game Boy Advance suffers from. These screens are way too small to accompany a game that is this hard, resulting in an even harder game. Honestly, there really isn't much to say here. The game is becoming quite the rarity as well, and unless you're a collector for the Wonder Swan, there really isn't too much point in getting this one over its original trilogy. The next 7 years was seriously weird. Capcom never gave a proper sequel to the game that we love so dear to our heart. But instead, we got a crazy amount of random spin-offs like Gargoyle's Quest and the Maximo series. And as good as those games are, especially that Maximo series, all we really wanted was a new good 2D platformer. And in 2007, our dreams were answered. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the very best game in the whole series in my opinion. Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins. And whilst I'm at it, it's probably the very best PSP exclusive that I've had the pleasure of playing. The game is now a 2.5D platformer, and probably one of the very best looking 2.5D games of its generation. Good old untrusty Prin Prin is yet again kidnapped, and you have to go and save her. Come on, you know the drill by now. Far more choices to be made by the player that help you upgrade Arthur and the weapons he uses. The game looks great obviously, and also the soundtrack's been knocked up considerably too. Now don't be put off by the easier style of this game over its previous entries. Trying to complete this game to 100% to get that true ending is extremely hard, and it requires you to go back to older levels via portals in search of trinkets. To this day, I've never been able to do it. If you have a PSP, get this game. A few years later, the obvious but very sad inevitable happened. Ghosts and Goblins, Gold Knights 1 and 2 were released 1 year apart from each other for iOS. I'm not going to be sticking with this one for long, guys. It's another probably not too bad if it wasn't for the pesky touchscreen controls mobile platforming game, which I'm sure you are all way too familiar with by now. And sadly, it loves nothing more than charging you every time you want a power up to help you through the hard game. Sure, you get a life bar, the game looks fairly okay for what it is, and if you played it with real controls, it could possibly be the easiest game in the whole series. However, that doesn't make it any good. It's really not worth it. And sadly, it's the final game in the series so far. Now, other than the previously mentioned Gargoyles and Maximo series, which I may do a separate complete history on one day, Arthur has actually, as you would expect, shown up in a fair few other places too. Firstly, and easily strangely enough, is another spin-off. An official spin-off, released by Capcom on the PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn. Any 90s kids out there remember the game The Incredible Machine? That game where you get given a simple task and you have to, using the tools presented to you, do that thing by building the incredible machine. It's actually quite a fun little game. However, a sequel was eventually made called Incredible Toons, where you do the same thing but with incredible tunes. And then you have this. Arthur and Astaroth, Nazumemura, Incredible Toons. The exact same styled game as this, but with a Ghouls and Ghosts sprite swap, and it's actually surprisingly quite good. Extremely bizarre, but honestly that's why I like it, and in true G&G fashion, the later puzzles get seriously hard. Another puzzle game that I however do not have the same love for is this simple puzzle game, where you collect fallen items in your underwear. This one obviously only came out in Japan. Next up we have this awful looking Skyrim mod. It was originally planned to be an MMO adventure game, but never got past beta testing. The idea was to also have online battle modes head to head with other players, set in locations you recognise from Ghouls and Ghosts, and you got customisable avatars. Thankfully the game never made it. Although the only other bit of information I have is looking at the picture you can see here, you can see there was a sudden change in cell shading for the game just before cancellation. At some point in time, and I can't exactly find out when, a 1v1 fighting game set in the world of Ghouls and Ghosts was also planned, but never got off the ground. In 2010, another attempt at bringing Arthur and the crew to the current generation was planned, a lot further in development this time. In fact, in an interview with the developer, the game had already been in development for 4 years up to this point. Apparently the levels every time you played them had a sort of random generation. You had several characters to choose from. And yeah, honestly, I would be very much up for trying this one out. Sadly, not much has been heard about this game since. The last beta testing was done in 2012, and it's crazy to think that games go under this amount of time and money being worked on and can eventually just get shelved indefinitely. But I suppose that's just the way it goes. Will we ever see more of this? I doubt it, but who knows? Here's hoping that one day we will get to play Magician Online. And finally, we've got the cameos. Mega Man 7 had a level looking remarkably similar to Ghosts and Goblins, and when you input a code, you actually got classic G&G theme songs playing over the top. In the game Zack and Wiki for the Wii, the theme song can also be heard. And in Marvel vs. Capcom, Arthur appears as an unplayable character throwing lances at your opponent. However, he did become playable in the third rendition of the game, as did Red Arima, who also appears in SNK vs Capcom Match of the Millennium and SNK vs Capcom Chaos. Arthur also appears with an overpowered suit in the game Cannon Spike, but if you still want to wear Arthur's original suit, then you can do so in We Love Golf. Enjoy Ghouls and Ghosts in the casino with this Japan exclusive slot machine. And finally, Red Arima can also be found in the arcade game Black Tiger, and he's also the final boss in this Zelda looking game Higemaru Makijima. I think it's pretty safe to say that although Capcom are not giving us anything recently in regards to Ghouls and Ghosts or Ghosts and Goblins, they know what they have. A kick-ass franchise with a huge following of fans behind it. Here's hoping for more games based on the franchise, and more great games featuring cameos of Arthur. Hey guys, thanks for checking out my video. If you want to check out some more of my videos, click the links that you see at the top of the screen. If you haven't already, please rate, favourite, comment and subscribe. And if you want to support the show that little bit extra, come and check me out over on Patreon. This is DJ Slope signing out, and hopefully I'll see you all next time.